President Trump has confirmed that strikes on Venezuela have been happening over the past few hours, and according to President Trump...
Today, we unpack one of the most consequential geopolitical moves in the Western Hemisphere in decades: the U.S. military escalation in Venezuela, the capture of Nicolás Maduro, and the deeper force driving it. This isn't about democracy. This isn't about saving Venezuela. This, as many voices have framed it, is regime change, plain and simple. Stay with me as we dive into power, empire, oil, and global strategic rivalry through the lens of PLO Lumumba analysis.
There's always been an appetite for regime change, not only with Maduro, but even with Hugo Chavez, because Hugo Chavez was seen to be pro-Cuba at one time. And this must be seen in the context of controlling the Caribbean and ensuring that you have a buffer, because in Latin America, you also have an administration in Brazil with Lula, which is not pro-United States of America. So all those factors conjoined tell you that there is a single thread, and they must not be seen independent of the fact that there is a rising power, China, and that the United States of America has said that as we speak now, there is a trade war between China and the United States of America.
Let's begin with the obvious question. Why Venezuela? Venezuela sits atop some of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. It's not a small country sitting quietly in the Caribbean. It's a resource power for global empires, a special oil-dependent power that's not an abstract number. Its strategic currency, leverage, and influence all rolled into one. And when a nation with such resources refuses to bend to foreign interests, that country suddenly becomes a problem instead of a partner. That's where we must situate the U.S. perspective.
When you see a power such as the United States of America very undiplomatically saying, one, that we have operationalized CIA within Venezuela. We have moved our military assets in the Caribbean Sea. Without being paranoid, what is being projected and telegraphed is that we are ready to put boots on the ground. And the reason why we actually were allowing the CIA to operate is to tell us where to hit, so that before we get boots on the ground, we soften the ground. And it is very easy in a country that is divided to create an environment where the leader runs away. Because once you create an environment that makes it unsafe for Maduro and the people around him to feel uncomfortable, then they run away. And when they run away, then there is a vacuum. And once there is a vacuum, then America can fill it with whoever you want. Remember, at one time, there was even an attempt at creating a government in exile. So you can very quickly have Maduro out and bring in people to say, you are now the ones that are going to be in charge of Venezuela. And once you're in charge of Venezuela, the great old America will give you the necessary support as you go through transition.
Now, in recent months, the United States of America escalated its military footprint in and around Venezuela, from strikes on alleged drug facilities to deploying naval forces in nearby waters. Then came a dramatic turn, a large-scale U.S. strike in Caracas. The capture of Venezuela President Nicolás Maduro claims that the U.S. would run Venezuela temporarily to facilitate a political transition. On the surface, American leaders framed all of this as part of anti-drug and terror efforts. But look deeper, as PLO Lumumba does, and the more unsettling pattern emerge: sanctions, covert operations, military build-up, and now direct intervention. This is not scattershot policy. This is strategic escalation.
Period. The President of the United States has very loudly wondered why it is not him that won the Nobel Peace Prize and it went to a Venezuelan. And he sees himself as the peacemaker in chief in the world at this particular time. You know, when you talk about drug trafficking in Latin America, somebody posed a very interesting question. He says, but why don't you persuade Americans not to take drugs? Of course, that is an interesting response to it. But the other thing is that the demand and supply side is there are things that tied in the hip like Siamese twins. But the reality is that these cartels are to be found in Mexico, the Escobars of this world, the bigger people in Colombia, in Mexico, in Venezuela, as we know. And the reality is that Venezuela is a soft target. Is a soft target because we now know beyond peradventure that some of the people whose boats have been struck are fisher people. They are not drug dealers. And that this extrajudicial killing is without basis. What one would do in ordinary circumstances, given the Americans' dominance on the sea, is to arrest these individuals. You arrest them and bring them to the United States of America for purpose of being tried. But in the case of Venezuela, I think a number of things are designed to be achieved. That you have Maduro here, who is a leftist, and is seen not to be playing ball with the United States of America. You have Lula in Brazil, who is at the heart of BRICS, which is trying to impact negatively the dollar and American economic hegemony. So how do we start? By sending a clear message to everybody in Latin America: if you don't play ball, we are going to deal with you with the way we dealt with Venezuela. And remember, the oil deposits in Venezuela and the geographical location in Venezuela is also very important from a geostrategic standpoint. Therefore, America would want to see some kind of lapdog, some kind of poodle of leadership in Venezuela to have comfort that that area, and by extension the Caribbean, is under their control.
Let's look at regime change, old tools, new faces. PLO Lumumba's central point, and is worth repeating, is this: imperial powers never announce their true motives. They dress them in a language of democracy, law enforcement, or stability. And truly, look at the conversation around Venezuela. We are fighting narco-terrorism. We are supporting a democratic transition. We are protecting human rights. Yet nearly every major power in the world, from Russia to Cuba, condemning the US action as illegal intervention. But this is not new. It is regime change by another name. History from Iraq to Libya to Chile has shown that military interventions, sanctions, and political pressure are the modern toolkits of empire, and Venezuela fits in this patterning.
I'm not saying that that is what will be the case, but these are scenarios that I believe everybody, even in Caracas, must be thinking about the possibilities. And even those who say that they are supporting Venezuela would not want to get into that space, because the nature of these wars is that if you get into those spaces, you are stuck in mud for a long time. Who wants to be stuck in mud? So, in my view, what is happening in Venezuela and the American attitude is very deliberate. Not only at the level of the United Nations, it's coordinated. That is why the opposition leader gets the Nobel Prize, in order to raise her profile. That is how the Americans then, in a very coordinated fashion, are also saying that they are at the head of a drug cartel. That is why they are saying we are now deploying CIA into Caracas. We are deploying CIA on covert activities and overt activities. What is the whole idea? We want regime change. They want somebody else to replace Maduro.
But the story does not stop with oil alone. The rise of global alternatives to Western dominancy, such as BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, has shifted the strategic map. Venezuela under Maduro forged a relationship with Russia and China, major players outside the Western orbit. This means the country is not just oil-rich, it is politically independent. That is a threat to unipolar world. And when a nation refuses to align itself with the Western structures, it quickly becomes a target.
That is why I think the United States of America, particularly during the Trump administration, is behaving the manner in which it is behaving. And when Trump says, "Make America great again," and is telling the world we are looking inward, I think there is also a sense in which he wants to project America as the dominant power. And if you don't restrict my examples in thinking about this issue, look at their recent statement in the Asian meeting. He's telling the Asian, make sure that China does not dominate. And that message is reverberating. Look at the message to Milei. We are going to give you money in Argentina, but only if you elect Milei or people related to him. So America is saying we want to occupy our immediate war post-1945 position in which we tell the world what is good for the world. And the Venezuelans of this world are the examples that will be used, that if you don't follow that script, then we destroy you.
Lumumba highlights something most mainstream commentary ignores. There is covert dimension to these operations. In recent months, former reports confirmed that the US authorized CIA operations inside Venezuela. This is significant because covert action, by its nature, blurs the line between law enforcement, democracy, and war. It allows powers to create pressure without full transparency, destabilizes governments without full public disclosure, prepare the ground for more overt military measures. This is regime change engineered in the shadows.
I think, and Maduro in Venezuela is under no illusions. In fact, on the 15th, or is it the 14th day of October, while addressing the nation, he said that Venezuela knows that there is an attempt to have a regime change, and that in fact the Nobel Prize has been given as one of the tools that is going to be used for regime change. And it should not be lost on us that what they did was to sever diplomatic ties with Norway and recall the ambassador back to Caracas. This tells you that they are aware that attempts are being made, and those attempts are very subtle and possibly designed even to ensure that there is a coup d'etat.
Let's confront the hypocrisy. If international law mattered universally, then why is Saudi Arabia untouched? Qatar a strategic partner, Egypt a military ally, yet Venezuela, a sovereign nation with massive resources, becomes a target. The pattern is clear. Power does not respect international law. Power defines it. And that is the insight Lumumba wants viewers to grasp. This isn't about democracy or human rights. This is about control, leverage, and influence. Now that Maduro is out of power, at least temporarily, and the US claim influence over Venezuela's transition, the future is uncertain. Questions that must be asked: who really governs Venezuela from this point? Will the Venezuelan people choose their own future? Or will an external power dictate the terms? Lumumba's warning is that once outside power intervenes, the nation's destiny is no longer in the hands of its people, and that is the most profound danger of all.
Venezuela is the next target, and they had better be very careful, because Trump is determined.
So as we conclude, what do we take away? Regime change is real, yes. Empire still operates only now under new narratives, yes. And understanding this pattern is the first step towards reclaiming sovereignty from Venezuela and for every nation that values its independence. If you found this explanation enlightening, like, subscribe and share, because the real story is never the surface story. Until next time, keep asking the hard question.